Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're continuing our off-season, I guess it is the off-season now, our free agency discussion, talking primarily about the quarterback situation. Once again, the Vikings also hired a coach, which is a little bit different, so we'll talk a little bit about Todd Downing and what he brings to the team and kind of what sort of... what it means to the Vikings to add that extra depth in the coaching department. And then we'll finish up with some Twitter questions as we generally do. So that's the game plan for today. Let's hop right into it then. Let's start off with Mr. Downing here. Drew, why don't you tell me a little bit about him, and we'll try to break down his value to this team.
Yeah, Todd Downing, he actually began his coaching career in Minnesota. He's an Eden Prairie native,
right.
And he started as a research and development intern in 2001, kind of worked his way up to an offensive quality control coach level, I guess, with the Vikings. Bounced around with St. Louis, Detroit, Oakland, Buffalo. I think he was actually named, quarterback coach of the year by PFF in 2015 or 2014. 2015, yeah, it would have been Derek Carr's kind of breakout year with Oakland there. So, he's obviously some of his ventures have been not as successful. Some have been very successful. Recently he's been very successful, I guess, with Oakland there with Derek Carr and that offense. Not so much in 2017 necessarily, but those past couple years as QB coach in Oakland, he clearly showed he's capable of developing young players and young quarterbacks. So now, coming over to Minnesota, he gets a chance kind of with Dave Filippo here now to kind of pick or hand select the quarterback they want to develop, which is kind of neat for both of them. I would assume that's kind of why Downing was brought in. Mm-hmm. Dave Filippo has experience with Wentz and Foles, developing those guys and maximizing their talents, and Downing has done the same with Derek Carr. So they kind of get a lot of perspectives there as to how and the process the Vikings will use to solve this quarterback dilemma.
Sure. So a couple things jumped out at me, and the first thing that I looked at with him was the thing that Drew brought up first, the fact that he is from Minnesota. He worked at Eden Prairie High School, which, if you know anything about my background, being from Cretin-Derham Hall High School, you know that it should be considered a great compliment for me to say that I consider that a big deal that he worked under Mike Grant at Eden Prairie, given the fact that I'm not a huge fan of Eden Prairie. So, But, so that speaks volumes in itself. You got a Minnesota native joining the staff, so it's a kind of a this is us mentality type thing. He knows what Minnesota is trying to accomplish, so that's good in itself. And then as Drew brought up, the point about Derek Carr, that's, that I feel like that doesn't carry enough weight, I suppose, because of what Derek Carr is right now. We all kind of have learned through the last 3 or 4 years that Derek Carr is actually a very good quarterback. And so guys like Downing, for example, are the ones that get swept under the rug a little bit. When you see a player, reach his peak, as we've seen Carr potentially do at this point, there's still a very valid argument right now that there's room for growth there. But the fact of the matter here is that Downing likely, almost certainly, played a big part in Carr's development, and he's part of the reason why he is the guy he is today. So we bring that to the quarterback discussion, which is, of course, what we're going to be discussing for the most part up until something is decided there. So apologize in advance, but that's just how it is. So, if you look at what he's able to do with Derek Carr, now you got to think about what type of quarterback Derek Carr is, right? Now, he's a rocket arm passer. He can throw the ball downfield. He's very good attacking vertically, and he's also very, kind of soft-spoken guy, a guy that lets his, tends to allow his work do the talking for him, as opposed to what you see from other guys across the league, I suppose. And so Downing represents, a guy that kind of comes with those same values from my vantage point. And that's good to see because the Vikings have a couple of these quarterbacks. You got Sam Bradford, who really doesn't say a whole lot despite the fact that he's from Oklahoma, former Heisman, all these passing statistics. The completion record, by the way, which we have not brought up in a while because Sam Bradford has been MIA. But then you got Case Keenum, who is as far as I'm concerned, about as humble as they come, given what he was, subjected to this entire season. And then
Yeah.
you got Teddy Bridgewater, who, if there is someone more humble than Case Keenum, it might be Teddy Bridgewater. So those are your three guys. And if I feel like Don from Ohio is going to get pissed at me if I don't mention Kyle Sloter, who also has kept his mouth shut despite getting a lot of praise from around the league. So I think that Downing's probably a very good fit here. I guess from what you're seeing here, how do you kind of apply, what he brings to the table for the Vikings?
Well, I think I'm looking at kind of the quarterbacks that Downing has worked with and that Dave Filippo has worked with to kind of try to see if I can draw some conclusions as to how they're going to approach this. And I look at the guys that they've, utilized, Oakland Raiders, Derek Carr, a mobile guy. And I remember Dave Filippo talking about, being mobile in the pocket, not being a statue in there, wanting a guy that can move and make plays that way. So for me, I think both Downing and Dave Filippo are kind of have Bradford as, down the priority list just because of his lack of mobility. And I would assume that vaults Case Keenum upwards, and other guys out there potentially that can move around a bit. Tyrod Taylor has been mentioned a little bit as a free agent quarterback. That'd be another one too. By the way, Downing was in Buffalo in 2014 as quarterback's coach, so that's another interesting option there. I don't know exactly how aggressively Tyrod will hit the market, but that's definitely an option. But I seem to think that they're going to want a guy that's comfortable moving around, making plays. So that kind of, for me, I look at this, and I mean, if Bradford wasn't already out of the picture for next year, this kind of, for me, solidifies that. And then, you look at the other options, Case Keenum and Teddy Bridgewater. When Teddy's healthy, we don't know, again, his health. That's still a big question mark, at least for me. But when has been healthy, he's been a very good mobile quarterback, very aware in the pocket. So those two guys, I think, are kind of the front runners for me. Kirk Cousins he's the other big name, obviously, thrown out for the Vikings. And I think he's mobile, but I think, in terms of pocket presence, stepping up in the pocket or escaping when it's, when that time comes, I think I would put Teddy and Case in that ability above Cousins in that situation. So, I think you can kind of start to draw some conclusions here from Downing and from Dave Filippo, what they prefer from their quarterbacks. But again, we're not in that meeting room. We're not going to be, a fly on the wall in that discussion. I wish we were. But, those are a couple things I've been thinking about since Downing was hired.
Yeah, so I guess let's kind of move on from Downing here into, I guess, a more thorough examination of what's going on with this quarterback position. So I feel like most Vikings fans are very aware of who the candidates are at this point. Like Drew just said, Sam Bradford has kind of fallen out of the picture a little bit. I'm not advocating that Sam Bradford should go. I'm just saying that his name isn't being brought up all that much right now. He's the type of guy where, he's a starter somewhere. So I have sort of gotten to the point now where I expect that he will no longer be with the Vikings. So that leaves Teddy Bridgewater and Case Keenum, and then a bunch of free agents as well. And also players on other teams. So, you look at what the offseason can do for you. And, I've challenged the opinion of a lot of general managers throughout the tenure of this show, however you want to say it. And the number one reason why I generally do that is because they don't use free agency, or they don't use, I guess, their ability to trade for players and stuff like that during the offseason, because that's the time you want to do it, right? You want to get the guys into your office, and you want to get them onto the field as soon as possible, and you want to start coaching them. The problem there is that sometimes you don't really know what you're getting. So you might be getting a guy that you think is coachable, and then he comes into Minnesota, for example, and he's no longer coachable for some reason. Maybe it's because he doesn't understand the scheme. Maybe it's because he had something going on at home. Maybe it's because of some other million reasons why he may or may not be a fit in X place. So what you have to do is you basically have to do a background check. You have to try to understand what these players are doing, and there's no good way to do that because you have to find someone to interview that you trust. And so that's why I loved the John DeFilippo hire, because you know that you can trust this guy coming from Philadelphia after what he was able to accomplish.
Yeah.
That's set in stone. Now, he still has work to do, and if he doesn't do anything, then we're probably going to be having, the fire coach discussion that, we see all the time.
Sure.
But I guess the point that I'm ramping up to here is that this isn't necessarily just about Teddy Bridgewater and Case Keenum. Those are the two of the most realistic options, but we can extend this as far as you want to take it, right? I know that you love Aaron Rodgers, and you know that I guess you know how I feel about Aaron Rodgers, but what it comes down to here is ultimately, can you get the best player on the Vikings for a given position? So if Aaron Rodgers is available, I'm putting everything away.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are.
I am going to put every single thing away and just let it happen, because it's the same type of thing as what happened with Brett Favre. If you can get talent, go get it. I'm not saying the Vikings can, but if they are able to, go get Aaron Rodgers. So this quarterback position is fun right now. I know it's insufferable to a degree because everyone has an opinion on it, including myself.
No, it's fun.
But it's fun. It's it's a very cool situation from a fan's perspective because there's so much to talk about. And really, that's ultimately what makes football great, is when everyone's discussing everything and kind of throwing out ideas and just having some fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I try to do with like on Twitter, for example, when you're going to get people that feel certain ways about certain guys, and you're not going to agree with everybody. But I think it's fun because you get my favorite part is the really hot takes, the ones that are just like, holy smokes, this is scorching hot. My phone is melting as I'm reading this type thing. So I enjoy those because I just laugh at them instead of get angry about them. I like to laugh about them instead. But to kind of summarize where we are right now with this quarterback thing, the Vikings are now, I believe the window is opened now to tag, franchise tag or transition tag players that are going to be free agents. So for the Vikings, that would be if they planned on tagging Case Keenum, they can now do that. And reports have surfaced. I think this one from Pro Football Weekly, not the biggest name I guess out there, but they did report that the Vikings do not plan to tag Case Keenum. Do not plan to franchise tag him anyway. So that does mean they could transition tag him. But I guess that does not bode well for Keenum's chances, I would assume. It doesn't seem like if the Vikings plan on giving him a long-term deal, that doesn't seem very Spielman or Brzezinski like to do that. So, the more this goes on, the more I think it's really a two-horse race between Cousins and Bridgewater. That's really how I see this boiling down right now.
Cousins too. We haven't even mentioned. That was actually the first time they've been brought up here. Yeah.
Cousins and Bridgewater seem to be the two front runners here. And I don't know if how much of our listeners listen to Paul Allen on K-Fan. He's talked a lot about kind of Cousins versus Keenum as the two-horse race. But man, when you look around, I guess not look around, but when you look back at things coaches have said, things players have said about Teddy, it seems completely absurd to give a guy the starting job after 2 years off and the knee issues and everything. Again, we don't know how severe it is, if it's even a thing anymore. But it just seems like the coaching staff, the front office, and the players, Darren Wolfson has reported this several times when people have asked him about it on Twitter, that love in the front office and the coaching staff, it's real. It's real for Teddy Bridgewater. Whether that's, person-to-person love like that or love as in what this guy can do on the field, it's not specified, but it's clear that the team and the franchise and the fans all love Teddy Bridgewater, and it seems like that's playing a big role in this QB debate. So I think it's going to be Cousins or Bridgewater week one, which, either way, I don't think you can go really wrong with either one of those guys. But I think, there's a lot of financial, consequences one way or the other, depending on which way you go there.
Right. I kind of did the Twitter version of an examination here on this type of thing, right? And what I mean by the Twitter version is I did like 3 tweets, all of them like 280 characters. So like a mini article essentially, right?
Good.
And I was kind of looking at, let's call them the ups and downs, I suppose, of all of these different quarterbacks. And you look at Teddy Bridgewater, and it's proven at Louisville. It was proven during his rookie season, but there's no guarantees moving forward. And that's really the main thing here. So when people are, expressing like, hey, chill on Teddy Bridgewater, it's not necessarily chill on Teddy Bridgewater because he's this great quarterback. It's more chill on Teddy Bridgewater because you're attacking the character of a man that has done a lot for this franchise, whether you can see it or not. That does not mean that he's the franchise quarterback. If you look at it from an objective standpoint, there's a very real chance that he is not the Vikings franchise quarterback. That's just how it is right now. Same can be said about Case Keenum. The franchise tag has been tossed around quite a bit. The transition tag I've also seen tossed around a little bit. And you look at kind of what he brings to the table, and it's similar to what Teddy Bridgewater brings to the table as well, in the sense that you don't really know what you're going to get in this new offense. But at the same time, he's more proven right now. So if you look at this, I guess, if you put your agent hat on and you try to determine, all right, how are you going to negotiate with Rick Spielman on this one? Because Spielman has leverage, whether you want to believe it or not, because he's got 7 quarterbacks or however many it is lining up at his front door. And that puts Case Keenum in a tough spot, but that also puts Spielman in a tough spot as well, because if he wants Case Keenum, if that's who he wants, well, then you're going to have to pony up a little bit, because this guy just brought you to an NFC Championship game. So, we've thrown around numbers, and ultimately the safest thing to do here is to offer any of these guys a 1-year deal. Now, there's a couple of them that are going to be pissed, no matter what. Yeah. As they should be, because, like I just said, Keenum just...
Well, then it boils down to, do you want to be on a team like the Vikings that's in a position to win right now? Right. You want to take a discount? That's kind of the thing we've been taught. That's been discussed with Kirk Cousins all this time. It sounds like the Jets are going to offer him this giant contract.
And that's kind of where I was ramping up.
Far and away the best or the most expensive of all time. But would he take the discount to come to the Vikings? That's the question that we'll find out hopefully soon.
Well, let's try to answer that question right now. So what do we know about Kirk Cousins? Well, he's the Redskins quarterback as far as I'm concerned, and he is basically looking to cash in. This is a guy that has been franchise tagged before. If you're not familiar with the franchise tag, just kind of a quick background on that. Essentially, is you're looking at a top 5 average salary. For the most part, there's a couple stipulations in there that I can't remember off the top of my head. But basically, you're going to have to pay him top 5 quarterback money, the average of the top 5 quarterback contracts. I believe right now that's Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, Joe Flacco might be in there. There's a couple of other names. But
now Jimmy Garoppolo, I guess.
Jimmy Garoppolo. Because that's
Matt Stafford.
Right. So you look at kind of what he's setting up to get, and there is going to be a team that has the capacity to offer him a ton of money. You mentioned the Jets. That sounds like a good option to me. Denver is another name that I would throw out there just because
Arizona, I think, is in there too.
Arizona as well. So what this comes down to here is you look at the coach that Kirk Cousins was playing with, and it was Jay Gruden. So now Jay Gruden, who does he know? Mike Zimmer from his time in Cincinnati. So there are very logical connections that you can draw here. Now, does this mean that Spielman is going to be able to kind of finesse a deal that works for the Vikings salary cap situation along with what Kirk Cousins wants and has absolutely earned at this point in his career? I guess we'll have to wait and see. But the easiest way to kind of rationalize this for me is that there's so many options that you can be annoyed with not getting your favorite quarterback, I suppose, or you can try to look at it this way and say that, hey, this team is going to be good. It doesn't necessarily matter who the quarterback is so long as you trust this defense.
That's the point.
But how much do you trust Rick Spielman to figure out the cap situation long term? If you're looking for a dynasty, I don't know if Kirk Cousins is the right guy. But if you're looking to win a Super Bowl next year, Kirk Cousins might be that guy. He has been endorsed by Brett Favre. There are plenty of very strong reasons to bring Kirk Cousins to Minnesota. It's just a matter of, does that fit with what the Vikings are trying to do from a salary cap perspective?
Yeah, I mean, the salary cap thing is kind of what's, I think, pausing for a lot of people when, you can look at this and break down the salary cap for the Vikings next couple of years. They have a ton of cap space next year as well, even more than they have this offseason. And it looks like the way things are right now, if the Vikings would sign Cousins to what would be the kind of expected deal for him, kind of barely enough to be the highest paid quarterback. I'm assuming that's kind of what he's going to end up getting. The Vikings would still have a very good chance of retaining, Stephon Diggs, Eric Kendricks, Anthony Barr, Danielle Hunter, all these other guys that are due for extension soon. Which that should be great news for Vikings fans because I mean it's not like, and again I've kind of said that Teddy Bridgewater's ceiling I think is still higher than Kirk Cousins' ceiling, but at the same time his floor. I also said Teddy's floor is dramatically lower because of the injury risk. 2 years off, like that's. Yeah. that's the way I've been.
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. Yeah.
Balancing that. So, with Cousins, I think you give him a better supporting cast. Those, Diggs and Thielen, arguably the best wide receiving duo in the league. You give him Dalvin Cook healthy for a season, or full season, hopefully. You give him, what would probably be a better offensive line. Looking at Washington, they weren't the worst in the league, but I feel like Minnesota's pieces, when all healthy, are better, I think, than Washington's. And then you have obviously the Vikings defense, number one in the league last year. You would expect Kirk Cousins' production, the wins-loss record, all to improve on that, which is why I'm optimistic about Cousins. Although I still don't really know if he's not my number one option right now, just because of really how much money that would be and how long the contract would be for. But it's a very good option to have for sure.
Yeah, there's very little doubt about that. Cousins brings a lot to the table, and that'll be something that we'll be talking about more and more as the offseason kind of drags along here, as we try to cope with the fact that the Vikings are no longer playing on Sundays for the foreseeable future here, unfortunately. So, let's take a break here from the quarterback discussion and jump into some Twitter questions here, and we've got a lot of them. Thanks to you guys, so we appreciate it.
We do have a lot of them.
And so we'll go through as many of them as we can here for however long, and wrap this thing up.
All right. Well, we can stay for the QB conversation for one more question here. I guess I'm going to make sure we have no more other quarterback questions. We have a bunch of other ones, but we'll start from Don from Ohio here. One more topic on the quarterbacks here. Give me a dark horse QB signing or trade the Vikings could pull off this offseason. So a dark horse name. The one I mentioned earlier that I think is possible is Tyrod Taylor. I've seen Ryan Tannehill, but I keep, maybe this is just my fantasy world, Aaron Rodgers, man. I mean
that's kind of where I was going to go too.
But, they fired the quarterback's coach without Rodgers' discretion.
Right.
He clearly isn't liking that.
Right.
And they could get, looking at the way their cap is set up and what Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb are going to be owed, they might end up getting rid of both of those guys. And I don't know how Rodgers would like that. So
then it comes down to how much does he like Devontae Adams.
Right.
I like Devontae.
Hey, just call me Lloyd Christmas.
Yeah.
Tell me there's a chance, right?
I'm
telling you there's a chance.
Okay. Well, there's always a chance, but let's try to be a little realistic here. So Rodgers is very likely like a hard no, because this is Green Bay we're talking about here. There's no way they would allow for Aaron Rodgers to go from Green Bay to Minnesota and allow this whole Favre thing to happen again.
But it'd be funny.
It would be funny. It would be very, very funny. You're absolutely right about that. So I'm going to side with Drew here. I'm going to call him the dark horse, which in layman's terms means not going to happen. But
the darkest horse. Yeah.
the deepest, darkest, definitely the darkest horse. Period.
Yeah.
Next question,
I agree with that. Let's see here. Ooh, from Kyle Slaby, here's an interesting one. Any players under contract you'd be willing to trade, and what do you think their worth would be? So is there anybody right now that you can think of that could probably get a decent enough return, or is that not – because I'm trying to think right now. I would just look at the solid depth options on the Vikings depth chart.
Right.
But at the same time, I was thinking cornerback. The cornerback had so much depth, but like Mackenzie Alexander, I feel like he has probably gained a lot of value this past season with the way he played. But at the same time, if you lose him, then you're left with Rhodes and Waynes at cornerback, and you have Newman, who is, he is returning for his age 40 season, but how much can you rely on that? So, man, I can't think of a name on the top of my head right now. I really can't.
Well, I'm gonna go to wide receiver because you chose cornerback, and
I think I know where you're going with this now. I should have said this one.
Well, you can't trade Adam Thielen. That's just
not what I was.
That's just not gonna. That's not going to happen. So
it's insulting that you would suggest that.
It is insulting. It really is, because of who he has become within this community and all that jazz. You guys know. So you look at I guess you look at the options that you have on the wide receiver depth chart. You've got Laquan Treadwell, who is everyone's favorite to trade pretty much, simply because he hasn't proven anything just yet. That's kind of what I see from the fan perspective, I suppose. But then you've also got Michael Floyd, who I believe his contract actually just expired. So he's actually not under contract right now. So the wide receiver depth chart is probably my favorite in terms of what you can play with because of the depth at the very bottom of it. I've spoken highly of Caleb Jones. I'm going to stand with that until proven otherwise. Jarius Wright has proven a lot as a slot receiver. There's still question marks up in the air on whether he can do the whole play on the outside thing, though. Let's note that he did beat Richard Sherman from the outside, and he also beat the entire Jets team on a screen pass. So there's value to be found on all of these guys. It's just a matter of what you want to get in return.
I thought of a name, and it pains me to say this because he's one of my favorite players on the team, but Anthony Harris, I think, would get a lot of trade value in return, being that he is in the Vikings secondary behind two. I mean, what are they? I mean, Sendejo had a heck of a year. Mm-hmm. So they're probably two top 20 safeties in the league, one of them being the number one safety in the league. So he hasn't really gotten that opportunity. Sort of, it's kind of like the New England Patriots thing.
Well, I'm going to flip.
Patriots quarterbacks keep getting all this value for being behind Tom Brady. I think Anthony Harris could have some of that value, some of that ripple effect behind him. So that's why I say that.
Okay, so here's my question from that. You're saying he played behind Andrew Sendejo, who had a great year. I'm not going to deny any of that. Andrew Sendejo had probably his best career year, as far as I'm concerned. So he has value as well. So I guess my answer to what you're saying is, if you believe in Anthony Harris as, I guess the role that Andrew Sendejo has been playing is more of a free safety role because of the way they bring Harrison Smith up in the box so much. So to me, Anthony Harris has actually been playing more behind Harrison Smith because he's kind of, I guess he fills in when Smith is put into the box.
The versatility that Smith has in particular kind of really, I mean, that's what changes everything. Harris is the number 3 safety, essentially. There's not really a backup free safety, backup strong safety. He just goes in. If Sendejo's out, then Harris goes up into free safety. But if Smith is out, I think Sendejo is even good enough to play in the box and then allow Harris to go up to the kind of the center field role as well. So that's why, I mean, I think a lot of teams look at Harris and see a guy that is, has a lot of potential. That's just kind of being capped right now because of the really solid starting duo they have already.
Well, so then you look at Jaron Kearse as well.
Right, and then the next question then becomes, all right, do you trust Jaron Kearse to step into Harris's role? Yeah. Do you draft a safety? Do you bring someone in at like a veteran to back that up? That'd be the next question, obviously. But that's just the name I thought of that. I think a lot of teams could look at as, we can get a lot of starting safety here. I think he could start on a lot of teams in this league now. Anthony Harris could.
And see, the reason why I like this thought and kind of why I'm drowning on about it a little bit is because you very rarely see these blue chip caliber players get traded, right? It just doesn't happen that often. And for that reason, it becomes very difficult to, I guess, trying to finesse a deal. So, I think about it like this. Remember when the Vikings went out and traded Percy Harvin to the Seahawks and got a first-round pick? And everyone was like, I guess the vast majority of the people that I was around at that time were not happy about it. And I was actually part of that group initially because
same.
You trade away this franchise caliber talent, this guy that you can do everything with, and you only get a first round pick. Well, let's try to think about what the value.
Percy was an MVP player for the first half of 2012. Right. You remember that? I mean, he was electrifying that first half of the season.
Absolutely, and there's really no denying that. So the question becomes, what does Rick Spielman want? And nobody knows the answer to that question because Trader Rick does everything and anything to
get his guys.
Yeah, that's kind of what he has been. So I guess the logical thing to do here is to try to look at these bottom of the roster guys and try to see if they have value to other teams in some capacity. So that's why I think that's why you're looking at Anthony Harris. I would also look at Jaron Kearse in that way. Simply because he came from Clemson. He's a former 7th-round pick and has kind of proven that he has the work ethic to continue to, move up the line a little bit. We saw some flashes of potential greatness moving forward from him on special teams this year. So we just went through 3 different positions there: cornerback, wide receiver, and safety, and there's plenty more discussion to be had. But the point being here is that the Vikings have so much depth that they really can do kind of what they want with these players on the roster, because they still have free agency and the draft to improve this roster. So things are definitely looking up from a free agency perspective right now for the Vikings, and there's a lot of reason to be hopeful about this team kind of getting back on the horse following that decimating NFC Championship game.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that'd be the next question is, what is Rick thinking with improving and kind of taking the next step up, which is, that's the ultimate question. A lot of that is being solved at quarterback. But I think we have time for one more question here. And if we did not get to yours, I have the names down. I believe Eli sent one in here. We had one from Josh Sweedland. So we have all these questions archived, and we'll get to them on the next one. Stephen A. Smith sent one as well. Not the Stephen A. Smith. At StevePot27 sent one. That's actually about a tight end in the first round, which I've been talking about my guy Dallas Goedert there as well. It's from South Dakota State. But we'll get to that one on the next one. Charles Harrison asked us to talk about the running backs. Anyway, the Vikings can keep Jerick McKinnon. I think Latavius Murray will be kept as an insurance policy for Dalvin Cook. So are all 3 going to be brought back? I don't personally see that happening, but what's your thoughts on that?
I kind of see that. The way I see it is that McKinnon is as good as gone. He's already came out and said that he wants to be a featured back somewhere. That is going to vault him into the discussion for other teams that are trying to do this sort of running back carousel type thing. Now, what it comes down to in my mind is that, does McKinnon want to be a featured back, or does he want to have an even greater role, and is he kind of basically saying like, hey, I know Dalvin's going to be the guy next year, I want out of Minnesota unless I'm going to continue to have an increased role on this offense. So ultimately what it comes down to is what McKinnon wants. Again, he has stated openly that he wants to be a featured back, and I don't see that happening in Minnesota. So to be frank, I don't think that there is any reason for him to come back because of Dalvin Cook's presence and because of Latavius Murray's presence, and then, of course, because the draft is still coming up, and we have seen in recent years that you can get quality talent at the running back position in the 4th round or later. It doesn't even matter. So I think he's as good as gone.
I mean, yeah, I think Kareem Hunt and Alvin Kamara were the top 2 rookie running backs, and Kamara was a 3rd, I believe, and Hunt was a 4th or 5th. I mean, right there. I mean, you can talk about Fournette was obviously really good. McCaffrey was really good. I mean, you talk about there's a bunch of first round running backs, but Hunt and Kamara, I guess production wise, if you look at like the numbers in fantasy football, I guess obviously there's a lot of different ways to judge running back play, but those 2 guys really stood out. So you can find talent at running back in the draft. And I think the Vikings will go that route here because I do not think Jerick McKinnon will be brought back. And I think, I'm not faulting Jerick McKinnon at all for trying to go get his opportunity, his shot as a starter, his shot as number 1 back. He's definitely earned it before.
There's been a lot of discussion about money as of late, and I guess I would say that with McKinnon, it's not necessarily about the money. And I try to speak for the players in the sense that. Yeah, I try to speak for the players in the sense that it's not necessarily ever about the money. It's about what the money says, right? So if McKinnon, if McKinnon gets this big contract somewhere else, it says a lot about what teams think about him and how he played last season. But it also says, how much value.
I mean, there's a reason Jimmy Garoppolo's QB contract is literally $500,000 per year more than I think Stafford's, like just barely higher, right? Yeah. Like it's just enough higher than Matt Stafford's to be the highest paid ever.
That's not coincidence.
That's not a coincidence. No,
it's not coincidence. So it's ultimately about what the money says. And for McKinnon, you look at his last season. 2017 year, the way he was able to step up when Dalvin Cook did go down, he has earned a massive contract.
He's been a viable starter before. In his rookie year in 2014, he and Asiata were kind of a 1-2 duo, but I think McKinnon, he had 4.8 yards to carry that year or something like that. Like he was top 10 in the league in terms of players who qualified with X amount of carries. He's shown he can be a featured back before, so I definitely don't blame him for going to get his shot. And try and make a name for himself in the NFL. So I do believe maybe Dalvin Cook, Latavius Murray, and then probably a rookie as your 3 running backs next year for the Vikings.
Absolutely. All right, then. So we will conclude our discussion for the day on that point. Once again, thanks as always for firing in those questions at us. That makes our jobs a lot easier, so please continue to do that. We'll be back, I would assume, later on this week. That's the game plan right now, at least. So thanks for listening as always, folks, and we will catch you later on this week.